Welcome, everyone. If you have participated in previous components of this webinar, then you know that we're talking about equitable grading practices, the role that alignment plays inside of them, and the importance of becoming a better diagnostician by thinking about and studying student progress toward outcomes and discrete learning targets. In this segment, we're going to talk about the difference between an integer scale and a grading schema, and documentation versus grading. An integer scale usually looks something like this. Rather than collecting grades, we begin to study student progress toward an outcome. In this way, our assessment becomes more equitable because we're being far more honest about the progress and the movement that learners are making toward a goal, rather than the completion of a project or percentage of items correct that often lives in absence of a deeper analysis around how those items specifically aligned to the outcomes for our course, our module, or a lesson. An integer scale helps us document whether students are working toward next or higher level course outcomes, whether they're meeting the target or outcome for our course, approaching it, or just beginning to become aware of what it even looks like. An integer scale allows us to document on a lesson by lesson basis the degree to which students mastered the target that we taught a very small lesson around. Rubrics and checklists are tools that can also help us make a far more discrete and a far more transparent assessment of the content and skills that learners have mastered. If you have these slides and you click on the word checklists or rubrics, you'll see examples of each, and this will help you distinguish one from the other as well. Not all tasks deserve or need a rubric. A checklist helps learners answer, what criteria do I need to meet in order to pass? Oftentimes that criteria does not involve levels of competence, but instead it simply articulates something that students are either doing or not doing. Checklists also help students answer the question, what do I need to do to get an A? And they only define what the A looks like. What do I need to do to make you happy? What will you be counting as you're reading my work? If you are quantifying anything, a checklist is a really good thing to use. If you have expectations of learners that are different from what they might be asked to do in the profession or in the field or in other classes, if there are very specific things that might make you happy, for instance, you need them to put a certain title or heading on their paper, or you need them to frame a response in a very specific way, a checklist is okay for that. If there are minimum components that a learner needs to make sure they have, the checklist will get them there. People often use grammar checklists, conventions checklists to have students do a final review and a line-by-line editing of their work. Are you looking for one particular response as an assessor, or one approach or one right answer? Then a checklist is what you need. Rubrics are very different. Rubrics define what quality looks like for a task or a process, and they define it by degrees of performance: 4, 3, 2, 1. Best practice suggests that we use an even number of levels because psychologically we tend to bias toward the middle when we're grading. A rubric helps learners understand what better looks like so that they can revise their work without waiting for an instructor's feedback. Rubrics are great sources of feedback. A rubric defines what it looks like when a beginner does something and when a master does something. And a rubric defines all of the levels in between. It also defines what it might look like to break the rules or be creative for a certain kind of work. And it makes it very clear to the learner what it looks like to break the rules as compared to simply doing it wrong. These are tools that you can use in order to achieve far more equitable, transparent, and sort of discrete grading practices that allow you to become a better diagnostician and that really help learners become far more targeted in their efforts to improve and grow. In the next component of this webinar, we're going to discuss how you might use an integer scale and the power of documentation, as well as mode, in order to assess student progress toward learning outcomes, report on them, and help learners improve their thinking, learning, and work as well.